Imagine trying to, like, totally erase yourself from the modern world. And I want to be really clear here. I don't mean throwing your smartphone in a lake and, driving out to a cabin in the woods to live off the grid.
Right, yeah, the classic off-the-grid fantasy.
Exactly. I mean, becoming a literal ghost inside a system that is intricately, meticulously, and frankly, obsessively designed to track your every single move.
Which is incredibly hard to do nowadays. I mean, it's nearly impossible.
It really is. We are talking about a world where your car's GPS pings satellites constantly, your credit card logs your location down to the square meter, and even the facial recognition at your local grocery store logs your anxiety levels while you buy milk.
Yeah, you're either a data point generating revenue and intelligence for these massive institutions, or you simply don't exist. There's a very little gray area left.
No gray area at all. Erasing yourself from that isn't just a lifestyle choice anymore. It requires a fundamental architectural rebellion. And today's deep dive sits right on that terrifying bleeding edge between existence and non-existence.
It's a fascinating place to look.
It really is. So we're looking at a stack of sources today. We've got memos, court transcripts, declassified surveillance logs, and personal journals. And this is all surrounding the San Aurelio documents.
Right, the infamous San Aurelio.
Yeah. Now, if you follow fringe history or like cybersecurity lore, you probably know San Aurelio as this highly controversial intentional community down in the Florida Everglades.
A place that tried to completely secede from the digital and economic grid.
Exactly. And it ended in this massive, fiery, and deeply tragic federal raid. But, and here's the thing, we aren't going to look at the whole town today. The sources we have allow us to take a real microscope to one specific individual, a man named Marcus Lee.
And Marcus's story is crucial, honestly, because it isn't just a standard biography of some tech founder.
No, not at all.
It serves as this profound and, frankly, uncomfortable lens through which we can analyze the massive tension between absolute individual privacy and the security apparatus of the modern state.
I totally agree. I mean, I see Marcus as the ultimate Promethean tech figure. Like in the old myth where Prometheus steals fire from the gods, gives it to humanity to kind of level the playing field, and then the gods chain him to a rock to have his liver eaten by an eagle for eternity.
That is a very apt, very visceral comparison.
Right, because Marcus basically looked at the fire of unbreakable encryption, tried to hand it out to the masses so they could hide from the digital gods, and the system came down on him with an absolute vengeance.
Yeah, they really did.
So we're going to trace his entire arc today. We'll look at his life starting as this clean-cut Silicon Valley coder, his transformation into an indicted radical, and finally, his evolution into an untraceable digital ghost.
And to understand how he gets to that wild endpoint, we really need to look at the architectural blueprint of his mind, like way before San Aurelio was even a concept.
Yeah, let's start there. Who was Marcus at the beginning?
Well, Marcus begins as this young, incredibly successful software engineer out in California.
Right.
He's making a significant name for himself in these really niche cryptography circles. And he runs a semi-popular blog where he obsessively critiques what he calls digital landlords.
Let's define that term really quick because it comes up a lot in his early writing.
Oh, yeah, constantly.
When he says digital landlords, he's talking about massive hosting companies, cloud providers, and payment processors.
Right, the gatekeepers?
Exactly. His argument is that we think the internet is this free, open, public square, right? But it's actually a massive shopping mall owned by, like, 5 corporations.
Yeah.
They own the ground we walk on digitally, and they can evict you at any time without due process.
And that philosophy points to a really specific literary and historical archetype that Marcus embodies perfectly. He's the rebel architect or the Promethean hacker.
Ooh, I like that, the rebel architect.
Right, because this is a person who fundamentally believes in the absolute purity of mathematics and systems. To Marcus, code and encryption are clean. They are deterministic.
You put an input in, you get the exact same output every time.
Exactly. Whereas human bureaucracy, human politics, corporate policies, these are all messy, biased, and inevitably corruptible.
But, I want to push back on their mindset immediately.
Call for it.
Because isn't it wildly naive to think you can build systems entirely divorced from human politics? I mean, I get the appeal.
Sure.
It's like gravity, right? You can't pass a congressional law to arrest gravity. It just is.
Right, it's a law of nature.
So in Marcus's mind, why should you be able to arrest an algorithm? But, and here's the flaw, gravity doesn't have an agenda. Code is written by people, and people always have an agenda.
You've hit on the exact blind spot. that the real world eventually forces Marcus to confront. He just assumes that if you build a mathematically perfect system, it will naturally create a perfectly fair society. But the collision between his mathematical idealism and human reality happens brutally.
Really brutally.
And it happens inside his own corporate workplace, actually. The documents detail an event we can look at as the clear catalyst for his entire radicalization.
The diversity memo.
The diversity memo, exactly.
So, okay, according to his archived corporate emails, there is a company-wide diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, training session that Marcus attends.
Right.
And the session is heavily focused on concepts like unconscious bias, allyship, and the moral duty to amplify marginalized voices.
Standard corporate HR stuff for that era.
Yeah, very standard. The official message being handed down by HR is that diversity isn't just a corporate priority. It's that adopting this specific ideological framework is the baseline measure of your value and loyalty to the company.
And Marcus, who filters the entire world through the lens of structural systems and logic, analyzes this training and sees what he believes is a massive systemic flaw.
He writes about it.
He circulates an internal memo. And what's really critical here is the tone of the memo, as described by the people who leaked it later.
Because it wasn't like a rant, right?
Not at all. It wasn't an angry, expletive-laden rant. It wasn't mocking. It was sharp, clinical, and intensely mathematical in its logic.
Just pure engineer brain.
Totally. He argued that this specific corporate version of diversity was actually a mechanism for ideological control.
Wow.
Yeah, he wrote that demanding absolute adherence to subjective sociological theories under the threat of professional termination was actually creating a monoculture of thought.
Now, I mean, anyone listening to this who follows tech history is going to immediately see the flashing neon parallels here.
Oh, 100%.
It's exactly like Google's James Damore and his infamous memo back in 2017. Damore also circulated an internal document challenging his company's ideological orthodoxies.
He argued from a perspective of biological and systemic differences, yeah.
And the corporate blowback on that was just nuclear.
The parallel is undeniably striking. I mean, both Damore and the Marcus Lee we see in these documents are engineers applying systems-level critique to social and corporate policies.
Right.
But if we look impartially at what this reveals about Marcus's character, it just shows this stubborn, almost pathological refusal to compromise his logic for social comfort.
Wait, I want to pause here because this is incredibly thorny.
It is.
It's so easy to paint Marcus as this rational free speech martyr who just wanted to debate systems. But from a corporate perspective, wasn't he just creating a toxic work environment?
That's the counter-argument, yes.
Because if you're a manager trying to run a team, you can't have a senior engineer circulating uninvited manifestos that challenge the fundamental workplace guidelines.
Right.
No matter how clinical he claims his tone is. At a certain point, a company has a right to say, hey, we are trying to build a cohesive team here, not a debate club.
And that is a completely valid point. A corporation is not a public square. It is a private entity with goals, and cohesion is definitely one of those goals.
Exactly.
But for Marcus, this is his first major collision with institutional orthodoxy. He sees a system demanding conformity, and rather than just keeping his head down and collecting his very large paycheck,
which he could have easily done.
Easily. But he immediately tests its structural integrity by pushing back.
Yeah.
He's the guy who spots a bug in the code and cannot simply ignore it, even if his boss tells him, it's a feature, not a bug.
But that memo was just a tremor, right? It isolated him socially at work. But the real earthquake, the thing that fundamentally shatters his worldview, is his discovery of what he later sketches out in his personal journals and labels the I.
This is where the story shifts entirely. It goes from being a corporate drama into a full-blown digital espionage thriller.
Yeah, it gets crazy here.
So Marcus is still at the company, but he starts keeping a physical notebook. He's overhearing conversations among senior network architects. He's looking at server configurations that disturb him, and he draws a flowchart.
Just a hand-drawn flowchart in a notebook.
Exactly. On one side of the page, he lists major tech companies: Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Google, Dropbox. On the other side, he draws these thick arrows, funneling all of this user data into two boxes labeled NSA database and NSA interface.
He even includes highly specific operational terms in the sketch, things like targeting feedback loops and upstream collection.
Yes.
And again, the real-world parallels are glaring. This flowchart is a nearly exact reflection of the NSA's PRISM program, which was famously exposed by Edward Snowden.
It really is. And we should probably explain what these terms actually mean structurally, because it highlights what Marcus was so horrified by.
Right.
Upstream collection isn't just a vague concept of spying. It is a physical, mechanical reality.
How does that actually work? Because I hear upstream and I just picture data floating down a river.
It's actually not a bad analogy.
Yeah.
The internet is built on physical infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking massive fiber optic cables running across the country and under the oceans.
Like actual physical glass tubes.
Exactly. Upstream collection means intelligence agencies are physically placing splitters on the internet backbone itself.
Wow.
Before an email even reaches Google's servers, or before a message reaches Facebook, as it is traveling at the speed of light down that fiber optic cable, a copy of the light signal is split off and routed into a government database.
So they are just drinking directly from the fire hose of global communication.
Literally.
And PRISM was the complementary program, right? Where instead of tapping the cables, the government was just going directly to the tech giants and pulling data from their servers through a designated interface.
Precisely. And if we analyze the psychological shift this causes in Marcus, it is profound. Remember his Promethean archetype? He thought he was building the tools of human liberation.
And then he sees this.
Right. In his archive blog posts from this period, you can see the despair setting in. He writes, let me quote this. I used to think progress was inevitable, that tech always bent toward justice. Then I watched my own colleagues build systems designed for control, not freedom.
That quote is just a gut punch. You can feel the sheer betrayal there.
You really can.
He realizes that the math isn't the problem. The problem, as he writes later in that same post, is the people who believe they are on the, quote, right side of history and what they will justify in that name.
Yeah.
He goes from believing that tech is an inherently democratizing force to realizing it has been weaponized into the greatest, most pervasive surveillance apparatus in human history.
And this realization completely shifts his trajectory. He can't just clock in, write code, and pretend he doesn't see the panopticon being built around him.
No, he's seen behind the curtain.
Exactly. This realization doesn't just make him quit his cushy Silicon Valley job, it weaponizes his skills.
Yeah.
He decides that if the system is building a massive surveillance eye, he is going to build a blindfold. And that brings us to his line in the sand.
Right, the app. So Marcus retreats to his apartment, burns through his savings, and builds a side project. It's a communications app that utilizes airtight end-to-end encryption.
And he designs it to be virtually unbreakable.
Yeah, and it gains traction incredibly fast. Activists use it, journalists use it, or regular people who just want privacy use it.
And inevitably criminals use it, which is what brings the government to his door.
Of course.
He receives this bland, heavily bureaucratic letter from a federal agency. But the underlying message is a demand. They want a recovery key.
A backdoor.
Right. They want him to build a backdoor into his app, citing law enforcement needs, national security, counterterrorism, and Marcus outright refuses.
I want to break down why he refuses, though, because people often misunderstand what a backdoor actually is.
Oh, definitely.
People think a backdoor is just a master key held by the quote-unquote good guys, right? Like a hotel manager having a master key to all the rooms.
That's the common perception.
But mathematically, that's not how encryption works, is it? It's not a key, it's a structural flaw.
Exactly.
I like to think of it like being asked to build an impenetrable bank vault, but the government tells you that you have to build one of the walls out of drywall just in case the police ever need to smash through it in an emergency.
That is an excellent analogy, really.
Yeah.
Because the fundamental problem with the drywall vault is that the bank robbers can find the drywall too. If you build a vulnerability into an encrypted system so the FBI can access it, you have also built a vulnerability that Russian state hackers, identity thieves, or malicious insiders can access. A backdoor destroys the mathematical integrity of the entire system.
And Marcus knows this structurally.
He knows it structurally, but he also knows it philosophically. In a public forum, responding to this mounting pressure to comply, he drops a quote that essentially defines his entire ethos moving forward.
I'm looking at the transcript of that forum post right now, actually. He says, "You can outlaw math, but you can't stop people from doing math. The cat isn't going back in the bag."
He is basically daring them to arrest him for writing equations.
Yeah, he's throwing down the gauntlet.
But the state and the massive corporate institutions aligned with it, they do not take kindly to individuals who refuse to hand over the keys to the vault.
No, they do not.
What follows is a textbook, brutally effective example of digital exile.
Yeah, it happens so fast, too.
Marcus starts losing his freelance contracts. Friends in the industry suddenly stop returning his calls. His server hosts threaten to drop his app. And then the media smear campaign begins.
Oh, the headlines we see in the source packet are incredibly aggressive.
Yeah.
A major local paper runs a Sunday feature. Privacy app becoming criminal haven, experts warn.
Just brutal framing.
You've got local TV reporters doing stand-ups outside courthouses claiming that prosecutors have linked Marcus's app to a growing number of criminal cases. They're heavily implying, if not outright stating, that he is intentionally creating safe havens for terrorists, hackers, and human traffickers.
Now, we need to carefully navigate this and look at the situation impartially, because there are two deeply conflicting truths here.
Right.
From the government and media perspective, there's a very legitimate, agonizing argument being made.
Yeah.
One cybersecurity analyst in the source material says Marcus is essentially handing out unbreakable lockboxes on every street corner.
Which, I mean, is a fair point.
Let's say you are a law enforcement officer trying to track a cartel, or break up a human trafficking ring, or find a kidnapped child. And the perpetrators are coordinating using Marcus's app.
Yeah, your job just got infinitely harder.
Your job, which relies on intercepting communications, just became nearly impossible. So in the state's view, absolute privacy inherently aids the worst actors in society. There is real physical collateral damage to what Marcus built.
That's the part that always makes me a little uncomfortable, because Marcus's view is entirely detached from that human collateral damage.
It is entirely theoretical to him.
He responds to the criticisms on his blog by writing, "Privacy isn't a crime. If you think it is, you've already chosen a side."
Right.
To him, punishing the toolmaker because someone misused the tool is logically absurd. You don't arrest the guy who manufactures crowbars just because a thief used one to break into a house.
But notice the tactic being deployed against him here.
The smear campaign.
Exactly. The source documents from the public relations firms involved explicitly note a core strategy. They say the smear always comes first.
Wow.
It is the standard playbook for neutralizing a digital or ideological threat. Before you arrest someone, before you seek a subpoena, you have to win the optics war. You have to isolate the target from public sympathy.
So the media flashes Marcus's smiling professional LinkedIn photo right next to grainy stock footage of masked hackers and drug busts.
Yep. They aren't debating his math or his philosophy anymore. They are actively destroying his character.
And it works flawlessly. California, the supposed global hub of innovation, disruption, and thinking different, becomes incredibly hostile territory for him.
He can't survive there anymore.
He can't get funding, he can't get server space, he can barely get a coffee without being recognized from the hit pieces. He is forced into this digital and geographic exile.
And where does a tech exile go when the mainstream rejects him and he's looking for the fringe?
He packs up his car and drives to Miami.
Miami represents a critical convergence point in this narrative. Historically and culturally, it is a city of exile.
Right, of course.
Marcus goes there, seeking refuge in a place where other outsiders, other people deeply skeptical of centralized authority are already gathering. And this geographical shift sets the stage for his transformation from a solitary digital rebel to the literal architect of a physical community, San Aurelio.
So let's set the scene based on the interview transcripts we have. Marcus is in Miami, hanging around these underground cryptocurrency meetups. He's talking to people about decentralized networks and privacy protocols. And through a random connection, he gets invited to a meeting at a roughneck bar called Red Dogs, out on Highway 27, right on the edge of the Everglades.
Very different scene from Silicon Valley.
Oh, completely. The sources describe it perfectly. It's this cinder block building, buzzing neon beer signs, cash only, motorcycles parked out front. And walking into this bar is Marcus, this clean-cut, pale, hoodie-wearing tech bro.
And waiting for him at a corner table in the back are the people who will become the core founders of San Aurelio. If we analyze them as archetypes, it's a fascinating group.
Let's go through them.
You have Sarah Whitfield, who the sources describe as the earth and heart of the group. She's an agriculturalist, a farmer whose generational livelihood was slowly crushed by state zoning regulations and corporate agricultural monopolies.
Okay.
Beside her is Gabriel Gabo Martinez. He's an older Cuban exile who fled Castro's regime and has seen firsthand in bloody detail how totalitarian systems operate. He is the voice, the historical experience.
Right.
And hovering nearby, keeping a watch on the door, is Ethan Brooks, a retired Army infantryman who serves as the shield, the tactical realist of the group.
I remember reading this section of the documents and just thinking, how on earth does a tech kid fit in with these rugged, physically hardened survivalist types? He doesn't know how to shoot. He doesn't know how to farm.
No, he doesn't. But the answer is actually in how he behaves at that table.
Right.
Ethan notes in his post-raid interview that Marcus didn't come in preaching about algorithms or acting superior. He came in, sat down, and he listened.
He just listened.
Gabo is ranting about government overreach. And he says at one point, quote, "You don't need to hide if you have done nothing wrong. You just need to make it so they physically and legally cannot touch you."
Oh.
And Marcus leans in. He realizes these people don't just want to build a theoretical digital fortress on the internet. They want to build a physical one in the mud of Florida.
And Sarah tests him, right? She basically asks, we have guns and we know how to grow food. What do you actually bring to the table, computer boy?
And Marcus doesn't talk about his app. He starts explaining mesh networks, local server hosting, and secure logistics.
We should probably explain how a mesh network functions because it becomes the actual nervous system of San Aurelio.
Yeah, it's vital to understand. Normally, when you use your cell phone, it connects to a centralized cell tower owned by Verizon or AT&T, right?
Right.
If the government wants to shut off your communication, they just tell the telecom company to turn off the tower.
It's a hub and spoke model. The tower is the hub, we are the spokes. Cut the hub, the spokes die.
Exactly. But a mesh network is entirely different. It turns every single person's phone or every router in a house into a mini tower. It's essentially a digital bucket brigade.
A bucket brigade, I like that.
If you want to send a message to Sarah on the other side of town, your phone bounces the signal to Gabo's phone, which bounces it to Ethan's phone, which delivers it to Sarah. There is no central tower to unplug.
So if Gabo turns his phone off, what happens?
The network just dynamically routes the signal around him through someone else. It is inherently decentralized and incredibly difficult to kill.
So Marcus passes Sarah's test because he provides the structural framework to make an off-grid community viable in the 21st century.
Right.
When they finally take a scouting trip to the abandoned swamp-reclaimed town of San Aurelio, Marcus isn't looking at the rotting wood and cracked concrete like the others.
No, as Ethan testified later, Marcus was looking at the sightlines. He was calculating how signals could bounce between the buildings. He was already wiring the physical space in his head.
And this brings us to one of the most brilliant, subversive, and ultimately dangerous things Marcus does. He doesn't just wire the physical town, he builds a parallel digital system to protect it from legal assault.
Because the government doesn't always come with guns first.
No, usually they come with clipboards.
Clipboard warfare.
Yes, the clipboard warfare. When the local county bureaucrats realize a bunch of sovereign citizen types are squatting in an abandoned town, they start sniffing around.
Naturally.
They try to bury Sarah and the community in code violations, environmental fines, and archaic property law disputes. They want to paper them to death. But Marcus weaponizes data against them.
He performs an incredibly sophisticated data scrape.
Tell me about this script he writes.
Well, he writes a script that pulls every single county land record, zoning ordinance, and historical plat map going back a century. And he builds a privately hosted, hyper-searchable database.
Just for the town to use.
Exactly. He creates a system that is vastly superior, faster, and more accurate than the government's own archaic filing systems.
The anecdote in the documents about this is just incredible. We have to picture this, right? An inspector from the county shows up at San Aurelio in a white pickup truck, clipboard in hand, flanked by 2 deputies.
The classic intimidation tactic.
Yeah. And he tells Sarah they are violating a specific wetlands zoning ordinance and hands her a fine that would essentially bankrupt them.
Sarah doesn't yell.
She doesn't yell. She calmly pulls out a tablet connected to Marcus's mesh network, taps a few buttons, and pulls up a digital record from 1984.
It's so good.
It proves that the county had actually rezoned that specific parcel for agricultural runoff, a contradiction that completely nullified the inspector's fine.
An inspector didn't even know the 1984 document existed because it was buried in a basement filing cabinet downtown.
Marcus flips the power dynamic entirely. In a private message to Ethan, Marcus writes, quote, "They pretend they're in charge because they have badges, seals, and stamps, but data is power."
He exposes the absolute fragility of institutional authority. The authority of a bureaucrat relies on the assumption of their competence and their monopoly on information.
Right.
Marcus proves they are incompetent, he breaks their monopoly on information, and by doing so, he strips them of their leverage.
It's the ultimate hacker move, but applied to physical real estate law. It's breathtaking.
It really is.
But his role didn't stop at legal defense. He becomes the unofficial treasurer and central banker of San Aurelio.
Yeah, they start building a shadow economy based on barter and physical silver bullion.
And it's Marcus who handles the incredibly complex daily conversions between incoming fiat currency like US dollars and the silver they use to keep their internal economy running.
He is basically taking the core principles of cryptocurrency decentralization, peer-to-peer trust, bypassing central banks, and applying them to physical metal.
Yeah.
He writes a custom ledger system to track who owes what in silver weight. And during this period, his confidence is absolutely soaring. He's thriving.
The documents show he even suggested, half-jokingly, that they officially name the town Galt's Gulch.
Which is a direct nod to Ayn Rand's novel Atlas Shrugged.
Right, where the world's creators and industrialists retreat to a hidden valley to escape a parasitic society.
But of course, Gabo and Sarah overrule him, and they stick with the historical name San Aurelio.
But the irony of this entire period is deeply tragic, isn't it? Marcus successfully turns these abandoned ruins into a highly functional, technologically advanced parallel society.
He succeeds.
He does. But this this incredibly visible, successful defiance of the standard economic and political system is exactly what puts San Aurelio squarely on Washington's radar.
If we connect this back to his initial sketches in his notebook back in California, the tragedy becomes apparent. The eye finally turns his gaze directly onto San Aurelio.
Yeah.
The alphabet soup of federal agencies, the Department of Homeland Security, the ATF, the FBI, the IRS, they all start converging, sharing files, and building a massive task force.
And significantly, the NSA explicitly flags Marcus's encrypted mesh network communications.
Yes. Let's look closely at the phrasing in the declassified NSA memos, because it is chilling.
Read it out.
The memo notes that, quote, the implementation of military-grade encryption in defiance of lawful access requests is, in itself, a form of resistance and evidence of conspiratorial intent.
Wow. They aren't even saying he is actively plotting a specific crime over the network.
No.
The mere act of keeping a secret from the state, the act of locking a digital door, is now classified as an act of resistance.
The massive, invisible apparatus he sketched years ago is now actively targeting him and his friends in the Florida swamps.
Behind closed doors, as revealed by those leaked internal emails, the government is facing a massive optics dilemma, though.
Oh, they were terrified. They were terrified of creating Waco 2.0, a massive, bloody, televised raid that turns the San Aurelio founders into martyrs for the anti-government right and the privacy advocate left. But they are equally terrified of what they call Ruby Ridge in the Sun, a prolonged, embarrassing standoff that makes the federal government look impotent and encourages other groups to replicate the San Aurelio model.
So what's their play?
The goal, as one CIA liaison notes in a memo, must be economic strangulation and reputational attrition.
And we see that reputational attrition happening in real time. The media takes Marcus's old blog posts, his defense of privacy, the existence of his encrypted app, and they just reframe his entire identity.
He is no longer an eccentric privacy advocate.
No, he's an indicted techie linked to radical anti-government movement. They trot out the same, quote, experts to say that the silver economy is a money laundering operation.
It's the exact same playbook they used when they smeared his app back in Silicon Valley.
But now the stakes aren't just his career, the stakes are life and death.
And the slow suffocation strategy eventually breaks down. The federal task force pushes too hard, Ethan's perimeter defenses react, and the situation devolves into direct confrontation.
Yeah, the standoff ends in exactly the kind of fiery, catastrophic raid the government initially claimed it wanted to avoid.
The sensory details in the after-action reports are just harrowing.
They really are. The documents describe the constant, maddening hum of surveillance drones circling above the tree line 247.
And the feds brought in massive electronic warfare trucks to jam the mesh network, right? Flooding the frequencies with noise so the nodes couldn't talk to each other.
Exactly. When the raid finally happens, it's just chaos. Tear gas canisters setting fire to the dry swamp brush, the popping of ammunition cooking off in the heat.
And the human toll is devastating.
It is.
Gabo, the Cuban exile, who just wanted to be left alone, is killed by an unclaimed, untraced bullet during the initial breach.
Daniel, a local preacher who joined the community, perishes in the flames of the makeshift post office.
And Ethan is severely wounded, shot multiple times while trying to hold a choke point.
And then there is Marcus. The description of his surrender is haunting.
Yeah, the FBI drone footage shows him emerging from a burning-out building. He isn't holding a weapon. He surrenders with his hands high, coughing violently through the thick black smoke.
His face twisted in ash and utter defeat.
And that specific image, the broken tech genius emerging from the ashes of his utopia, is replayed endlessly on the evening news. The system finally broke the rebel architect.
But the physical destruction of the town, the burning of the buildings, was only the first half of the state's response. The second half was the legal dismantling.
Right, the trial.
And the trial of Marcus Lee is fundamentally a philosophical trial of code. Let's break down the courtroom drama here, because there are two completely dueling narratives at play, and they strike at the heart of what it means to write software.
Okay, so Marcus is charged with conspiracy to obstruct federal officers and providing material support to an unlawful paramilitary organization.
Which sounds incredibly intense.
It does. Now, the defense's strategy is to humanize him and de-weaponize his actions. They argue that Marcus is simply a computer scientist. He didn't shoot anyone. He didn't build bombs.
He was facilitating basic, fundamental human exchange.
Exactly. He was helping neighbors trade eggs for silver, milk for labor, by writing a ledger program.
They argue that he refused to build a government backdoor because he believed in the constitutional right to privacy, and he carried that same ethic to San Aurelio to protect a marginalized community from harassment.
Their core argument is basically, just because bad people can use privacy tools doesn't make the creation of privacy tools a crime.
But the prosecution's narrative is an absolute masterclass in framing.
Political.
They don't talk about eggs and milk or constitutional rights. They frame his code, his database scraping, and his cryptography expertise as literal weapons of subversion.
The lead prosecutor repeatedly uses the phrase shadow economies.
Yes.
They argue that writing a program to trade in untraceable silver isn't just math. It is the exact mechanism extremists use to fund terrorism and evade taxes.
And crucially, they drag his old messaging app back into the light, claiming he has a demonstrated historical pattern of building tools designed to aid criminals.
The climax of the trial comes during the prosecution's closing arguments.
I remember reading this.
The prosecutor points directly at Marcus, looks at the jury, and says he doesn't build apps anymore. He builds insulated, heavily armed communities. He is not a naive programmer. He is dangerous.
Wow.
And this raises the ultimate analytical point about Marcus's fate. Marcus wasn't truly prosecuted for violence. He was prosecuted for his identity and the power of his tools.
Right, like, is code speech? Is writing an algorithm an act of conspiracy?
The government decided that building a door the state could not unlock is, by definition, a threat to the state.
And the judge's sentencing confirms that completely. He shows no leniency at all. The judge looks down from the bench, calls Marcus a dangerous ideologue wrapped in code, and sentences him to 10 years in federal prison.
10 years.
10 years. For building databases, maintaining a mesh network, and facilitating private trade.
He serves every single day of that 10-year sentence, too. It's a federal charge, so there is no early parole, no review, no mercy.
The system extracts its pound of flesh.
They take a decade of his life, his most productive years, to send a message to anyone else who might try to build a blindfold for the eye.
Now, you'd think a 10-year sentence in federal prison would completely break a person. And maybe it did break the human side of Marcus. Because when those prison doors finally open...
The man who walked out didn't go back to his old life.
No. He essentially ceased to exist.
Upon his release, the Bureau of Prisons logs simply list him as released, and then Marcus Lee completely vanishes.
There are no cameras waiting for him at the gates, no crowds of libertarian supporters, no book deals.
He steps out of the prison and just evaporates into the ether.
The rumors surrounding his disappearance are incredible, and they really fuel this mythology around him. Some people swear he fled to South America.
Right, that he's living off a hidden cache of Bitcoin in Argentina, Paraguay, or Uruguay.
Others swear they've seen him at highly obscure cybersecurity conferences in Eastern Europe, looking older, much grayer, using assumed names.
But still passionately arguing in the hallways about code and elliptic curves.
But the most compelling evidence that he is still active comes from the digital breadcrumbs he left behind, doesn't it?
It does. The source texts note that years after his release, on highly technical invite-only cryptography mailing lists, posts begin to appear.
Anonymous posts.
They are signed with strange, untraceable, constantly shifting handles. But cryptographic linguists and old colleagues who analyze the text point to the phrasing, the cadence, the incredibly terse and rigorous structure of the mathematical arguments.
And they talk a lot about his use of elliptic curves, which, sounds like sci-fi jargon, but it's actually the backbone of modern encryption, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
To explain it simply, elliptic curve cryptography is based on a mathematical concept called a trapdoor function.
Okay, a trapdoor function.
It's an equation that is very easy to calculate in one direction, but practically impossible to reverse engineer unless you have a specific piece of secret information.
So it's easy to fall through the trapdoor, but hard to climb back out.
Exactly. It's the math that makes it possible to create a digital lock that would take a supercomputer a billion years to crack. The posts on these forums show a master-level understanding of these trapdoors.
But more importantly, the people reading them point to the author's absolute, stubborn, uncompromising refusal to yield on the principles of privacy.
Right. It sounds exactly like the man who wrote the diversity memo and built the San Aurelio mesh network.
If those posts are him, it represents the profound, almost poetic completion of his character arc.
It really does.
Think about it. Marcus spent his early life trying to build untraceable systems, messaging apps, property databases, parallel silver economies. He tried to build fortresses for other people.
But ultimately, after being crushed, burned out, and jailed by the state, he applies that foundational principle to himself.
Exactly. He internalizes the encryption. He becomes the unbroken cipher.
He transitions from being a public advocate fighting the system in the open, writing blogs and debating inspectors, to becoming a literal ghost evading the system entirely.
He's the only founder of San Aurelio whose fate isn't finalized. Gabo and Daniel have graves. Ethan has a 40-year prison sentence. Sarah was buried in endless probation and debt.
But Marcus, his ambiguity is his final victory. The eye cannot see what doesn't leave a trace.
If we summarize this incredible journey, we see the evolution of a man who recognized the panopticon early. He started by sketching the architecture of the eye in a notebook.
He tried to blind it with unbreakable code.
Right when that failed and he was exiled, he fled and built a physical refuge in the Florida swamps to escape it.
The eye found him there, and it crushed him and his friends.
But in the end, after paying the ultimate price in time and suffering, he finally learned how to simply become invisible to it.
It is a wild, sobering story.
And I want to connect this directly to you, the listener. Think about your own digital footprint right now as you listen to this.
It's a lot bigger than you think.
It is. Think about every time you blindly tap, except on a terms of service agreement. Every time you use a quote-unquote free platform to message your friends or store your personal photos or map your route home from work.
Ask yourself how much of your daily life, your habits, your beliefs is actively feeding into the modern, real-world version of the eye.
Marcus Lee saw it coming decades ago. He saw the architecture of control being laid down cable by cable, and trying to build an alternative cost him almost everything.
And that leaves us with a final, lingering question to mull over.
Yeah.
The state successfully destroyed the physical town of San Aurelio. They burned the buildings, they jailed the founders, they won the optics war on the evening news, and they maintained their monopoly on authority. But if Marcus Lee is still out there, if he is sitting in a cafe in Buenos Aires or in a basement in Eastern Europe, writing code in the shadows under an assumed name, quietly building new, decentralized, untraceable networks.
Did the government actually stop the threat?
Or did they just force the architect of the rebellion to become something far more dangerous, a ghost they can no longer track?
A literal ghost in a system designed to track your every move. It really makes you wonder who is actually winning the arms race. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the San Aurelio documents. Until next time, stay curious and maybe double-check your privacy settings.